Okay, welcome everybody to the September 2nd, 2020. There's a typo there. September 2nd. I'll read anything on the prompter. September 2nd Octant community meeting. Today we're going to talk a bit about what's kind of missing from our list of built-in API resources that we show views for. Scott Andrews has done a lot of work on an Octant plugin for Knative that we're going to show a quick demo of, which is written in the new JavaScript plugin API. We're going to talk about the upcoming release, and we're going to just say some thank yous to Scott and Nana and Andrew, who were recently working on Octant, but will be off doing some other things. Hopefully they'll still be around a little bit, but probably not as much. So with that, I think Sam, you put this one in here if you want to take it.
Yes, so this one came in from a Slack request last week, and someone asked why don't we have pod security policies? And I think there's an outstanding issue for storage class. And so we still have a bunch of API resources that hasn't really been implemented. And my question really is, how are we prioritizing these? Are we doing them as they're requested, or do we ever have plans to have the complete list and make it configurable to maybe have users choose what they want to have in Octant? But I think I'd at least like to come to some consensus on what we'd like to implement in the short term.
Okay.
And I think I don't have any issues with adding pod security policy and storage class as is, but we'll still be missing a few.
Okay. So we're gonna so basically the outcome of this is we're gonna add pod security policy and storage class. Cool. Any questions, comments there?
Yeah. Do we want to add more? I guess what is our plan for adding more?
So what's been working, I mean, honestly, I will say, I think what's been working pretty well is someone comes along and says, hey, I would like to see that, and then we add it. I don't know that we want to go through the exercise of arbitrarily just adding everything, because honestly, some of it isn't, like if we just add all of it, some of it isn't that useful. And then now we're like, where do we put all of it? And we're already kind of in a situation where we might need to rethink and redesign our nav and like how our menus fly out and how things stack before we go and just add everything.
Okay.
By arbitrarily adding everything is kind of how custom resources work today.
Yeah.
For better or worse.
All right, so I'm going to put on the note here, will add as requested by community.
Unless there's, very special need that we think we satisfy with adding it. I would really wait for community to push us in that.
Yeah, and storage class was asked for in an issue, and then pod security policy was just asked for on Slack. So I think both of those qualify as, like, for me, if like one person asks for it, I'm like, all right, this is good enough. Cool. So moving on to the Octant plugin for Knative. Scott, did you want to do a demo or just talk about the repo? Or
yeah, I can do a quick demo if
awesome.
if I can share. Make sure I got the right window. Okay. So I'm losing track of time, but I think it was last week, maybe earlier this week, got approval to open source a new repo. So this is an Octant plugin for Knative. As Wayne mentioned, this is using the new JavaScript API, and they've really been kind of using this as a proof point to kind of like exercise that API and sort of iron out some of the rough spots. There certainly are still some rough spots in that API, and to actually run this, it will definitely require building Octant from source right now until we get 0.16 out the door. Because it would definitely require some changes that will break Octant prior to that. So to actually get going with it, basically just clone the repo, install the npm dependencies, and just run npm run plugin install, and that will basically copy, or it'll build the JavaScript plugin and copy it into the config. To uninstall, basically just delete that file, and what it looks like when it's running. So basically just have a new plugin that gets added, contributed to the nav bar. And here, without getting too deep into the details of Knative's model, so far is focusing on Knative serving, which has services, configurations, and routes. So a Knative service basically decomposes into configuration and routes, and then there's a couple other resources internally. So basically we can see a quick overview of what all these resources are. If we drill into one of these, we can basically see a summary. So this spec is pretty basic. There's a lot more detail that needs to still be fleshed out. But we can see statuses, we can see the URLs that have been assigned to it, we can see the latest revisions. So revisions is one of those nested resources sort of that's created internally. And one of the things that Knative really can do is that every time you modify the spec, it'll basically just stamp out a new revision. And those revisions are intended to be immutable, and then you can route traffic to various revisions. So you can basically do things like blue-green deployments, or do canary deployments, or just sort of like really sort of advanced surgical routing. So you can do more advanced traffic policies. Don't have the ability to edit this yet, but you can sort of break down the percentage of traffic that you want to send to various revisions, as well as you could see the revisions that are up in here. So within the plugin, basically have all the things you would normally expect, like a metadata view, a YAML editor, so you can go edit things. Something I've been playing around with, this isn't on in the repo yet, but I've been playing around with our resource viewer. So because this is using the JavaScript API, we don't have access to a lot of the API facilities that the Go plugins do, just because it hasn't been built out yet. So basically, for the resource viewer, I had to actually go physically look up all these resources and sort of like construct the view rather than having it automatically kind of find owner references, and like when you find the deployment, knowing it'll know how to like go find a replica set in a pod, and like there's any secrets that are bound to it, or config maps that are bound to it, or like the service account. So like that sort of has to all be done manually right now, just because it's a different API. But that basically gave me the opportunity to kind of like rethink, okay, what should a resource viewer be in the Knative world in terms of a control plane? So basically just have a quick visualization of the Knative control structure. But then I also was thinking, okay, so there's the control structure, but then also Knative has this notion of being able to route traffic to different configurations and services, or sorry, different revisions and configurations. So within a single Knative service, typically it's all sort of self-contained, but there's no reason why you couldn't have a route that referenced a different configuration or a different revision. So the idea of having a separating from the control plane of the resources, having sort of a data plane view. So this is a pretty simple use case because it's just basically one service that's receiving traffic and forwarding it to a single revision, but sort of just having a different representation of sort of the same fundamental underlying data structure. There's still a lot, this is like very much work in progress. There's still a lot to flesh out. So like all the statuses are not accurate. All the selected fields are not quite working right. But it's just sort of an idea that I'm playing with. So kind of going a step further, within a revision, basically have, again, sort of the spec and status, but in this case, a revision is something that independently will scale from 0 to n replicas depending on the number of requests coming in. So one of the big things about Knative is it's serverless, so by default it'll scale down to 0. So being able to see all the pods that are actively running, in this case there are none, but as traffic comes in, this would scale up and you would see pods as they're starting as also as well as they're terminating. They would show up in this listing. Then finally, I guess one of the things that's a little interesting is I haven't seen this pattern in Octant before, but wanted to have the ability to create a new service. So this is a little bit janky at the moment in terms of just trying to wire in a form. So like this is not fantastic, but once you click into it, you can basically then define a name. So give it a service name, and I'll just give it a hello world image. That's exciting. There it goes. Also have error pages. So then it'll basically just go create that new service, and then you can sort of interact with it how you normally would. So just sort of the idea that Octant doesn't have to just be a tool to be able to visualize resources, but we can also start to create things. So I think all that's the highlights, unless there's something else you want to see when.
No, this is great. I guess the question I have is, so like the data plane tab is really about kind of visualizing the service with its traffic policy and its revisions, right? So like the idea is that, yeah, I really like that.
So it's very much just trying to visualize the traffic policy listing rather than it just being a table. And in this case, it's so simplistic. It's almost like actually not that interesting. But like if there was a way to be able to actually like annotate this edge with the percentage of traffic that's being received, or being able to do some sort of visualization so you can actually see the amount of requests that are going into a given node, or just some sort of like slightly different visualization hierarchy.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. How are you creating this data right now, like shape data and all that?
So I don't have this committed at the moment, but I'll put up a PR and I'll link you to it. So basically just created a couple helper methods to try to create nodes and edges, and
nice.
Using the resource viewer component to actually represent the bigger component.
That's
so
awesome.
that's kind of like one interesting point about the current JavaScript API is that it's very much declarative structures. There's almost no imperative helpers like that the Go API has a fair number of. So when you need those things, you kind of have to like recreate them yourself right now. I guess something else that's kind of interesting to call out, just the idea of having lots of subpaths and sort of routing. So like the plugin doesn't provide any facility for being able to define routes within a plugin. So I went to found some routing library that actually allows you to do parameterized paths, and will actually do the mapping for you and sort of like tease out the chunks of the URL that are relevant.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, I had wondered because we had a conversation about the routing on the issue, and I had wondered if there was going to be like a pre-existing JavaScript library that might help do it.
Yeah, so with the one I ended up using, which is actually, I believe it's used inside of the Ember router, but they basically abstracted it into a library.
Nice.
So it is route recognizer.
Excellent.
And
I will say that anytime that we add a third-party package to the JavaScript plugin and it transpiles and works, I'm very pleased. So
yeah, I mean, this is also like a fantastic library because it has no dependencies.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah.
and it is intended to be like the core of other libraries that get consumed. So it was like perfect for the use case. Its API is a little bit squirrely. So I think we could still do something more to actually like put this into a better API, because it's still dependent. It's still intended for like views that are decorated. So you can actually define like routes and then sub routes within that. And so you can kind of like get sort of the window Chrome that's decorated as you have like multiple matching path segments. But I just needed like one tier, one level just to kind of go and map everything in.
Yeah, this is it might be nice, and this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but I think for especially on the plugin, the JavaScript plugin side, it might be really nice to have a combination of following more of the like dependency injection pattern along with a decorator pattern for routes. So then you could decorate any function to say it's a route with this path, and then use dependency injection to get the dashboard client, the HTTP client, and things like that in there.
Yeah, so a lot of the primitives are definitely in place in terms of just being able to render out components, but defining more of the idioms would definitely be helpful.
Yeah. Cool. There was one other thing that I noticed that I wanted to mention. Not related to the plugin, but the not found page. I think it would be nice if we had the ability to signal to the not found page that we're expecting something to be there, so that the user gets like when we get the loading indicator working again, we could manually say like go to this not found page and have the loading indicator functioning or something like that. But anyway.
Yeah. So I basically created a clone of the Octant not found page with a little caveat that it links off to the Knative dev site instead of Wikipedia about
nice.
Octants. But just to kind of get the same pattern, but I had to wire it in myself.
Okay. Yep.
Which certainly works. As long as you're not concerned about having like different look and feels for not founds.
Yeah, this is great. This is excellent.
Yeah, pretty cool. Nice work, Scott.
Cool.
Anyone, any other questions or comments for Scott on that before we move on? All right, let me share the agenda again. Go. So moving on to upcoming release. So the demo that you just saw for the Octant plugin for Knative will require this new release. So if you're interested in trying it out, you currently have to download it nightly or build it from source. The upcoming release will, well, first we have a couple blockers. One is we added some speed improvements, which we talked about in the last community meeting, and PR 1242. Those kind of, they worked, but they were a bit of a hack. And the result is that we broke some things. And also when we tried to fix the hack, we introduced component flicker again and broke that. So the short of it is there's a blocker on getting loading indicators back in place. It might not be the circle spinning indicator that we've used in the past. It may be a bar across the top or something to indicate that there is progress being made. Because right now there is no indicator. It's currently broken or not being displayed. It's not really broken, just took it out because it didn't fit our existing model. And then there was some component flicker that is blocking that was reintroduced where things would pop on the screen, pop off the screen, pop on the screen in a really rapid way. Very not friendly at all and annoying, and a source of frustration for anybody who would actually use it. So we're not going to be releasing until those two things are unblocked. Actively working on them. There's PRs in flight. There's discussions in flight about how we might solve these things. So I don't expect that they will hold us up for too long. But those are the current blockers for the 0.16 release. But on the good side, what to expect from 0.16, it's faster. Both visually, like it pretends to be faster, but also it actually is faster. We've changed the way we've loaded some components, and we have removed some of the overhead around loading data grids with data all at once. And so the result is a faster render, but then you also get, so it's both. It's perception as well as real time. So that's a great improvement. We've expanded the plugin API to include events. So on the Go side, you can send alerts. On the JavaScript side, it's a little more generic. It's an event sending endpoint. And that allows you to do the two events that we currently support, which are alerts and redirects. you saw redirects being used in the Octant plugin for Knative demo just now, where Scott created a new service and it redirected to a page. We saw the not found page, and then once the resource was created, we saw the resource page. So very common use case that people have been requesting for a while. So you will have that ability now. And to go along with that, there's some new components that we've been working on: a stepper component and a modal component. The stepper component, I believe there was a demo of it at one of the previous community meetings, but I don't think I have anything that can demo it right now. Maybe I'll put Sam on the spot and see if Sam has something that is demoable with a stepper component at the moment. I know he's been working on them, so maybe we can show it. But if not, that's fine. And then there's so the stepper component, the clarity stepper. Let me pull it up. Let's see. Let's demo it that way. It's also currently in our what do you call it? Storybook site. So, but this is the stepper component. It is it allows you to capture form inputs, put validators on there, and then you know you can go to the next field, and submit the form. Right now, each step has to be declared ahead of time, and there is no way to do any processing between steps. So you have to kind of already know all of your steps ahead of time and be able to put all of the form information and validation that you want in place. We are currently working on how we want to handle dealing with per step validation, which would then inform the next step of its contents. That's something that we are actively looking at, but it won't be in this next release. And then the modal is something that exists within Octant already, but we didn't really expose it through the API. It was just, we were leveraging it through Clarity. So you will be able to define and use your own modals, and they can have forms embedded in them. I believe that was the use case that Sam was using. So, you know, there's that. I think can do, I don't know what we have for sizing and stuff like that. I'm not sure, but Sam worked on that. So Sam can add some detail around the modal component.
Yeah, I probably, let's see, wouldn't be able to do it right away because I think my open PR right now is still built with the previous version of Angular. So I'm just going to have to, yeah, so serving it is going to be weird. I think I have to like just remove node modules and rebuild it again if I want to demo it. So I'm not going to tap dance for 5 minutes while that happens. But there's a screenshot in the PR. I think it's like 1305, and it's fairly straightforward. You can have a modal, and it kind of just, if you're familiar with Flex layout, it's kind of similar to that. You can just throw any component on it. It's got a little bit of business logic in it. So if you just have a plain old component in it, the button will be closed. But if you added a form, it will be submit and cancel. And this raises some interesting questions around like if you had a stepper component inside a modal and you submit and you get to the final step and you submit the information in the modal, it kind of just stays on the modal as a success and it goes away. So there's definitely going to be more cases this has to address, like what happens when you start filling out a form and you close out and you come back. Does the data stay there or do you expect it to clear? So there's a bunch of interesting cases that we can talk about. So this is really just meant to start a pattern for us to think about what submitting forms in Octa might look like.
Excellent, great. And the not found page, which we saw during the demo, is just that. Scott created a page that will display a more friendly error, letting you know that the resource you're trying to get to could not be located. It actually has some suggestions. Make it, like it says, maybe it was deleted, maybe it's still pending being created, maybe it's never coming back, and you should go somewhere else. Like it's informative and works. So that is something you'll see when you're using Octant now. It's a little more friendly than what we had before, which was, I believe we just sat you on a spinner and you just sat there looking at nothing. So this is much better. Anything, did I miss anything on the not found, Scott?
Yeah, the previous behavior is that it would actually redirect you up one level of the URL hierarchy.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So it would actually move you
It's
from where
even
you
worse.
were. Especially if you redirect to a page while it's being created.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally, I mentioned this at the start of the community meeting. I just wanted to say thank you to Scott and Andrew and Nana, who were working on Octant recently over the last couple months, and made a lot of great contributions to the upstream. We've they're going to be doing some other things within VMware, so they won't be working on Octant core as much, but they'll probably likely still be developing plugins and doing some interesting things and causing work for us, which is great. So I look forward to that. So I just want to say thank you. And Scott's here now, so thank you, Scott. And that's it. Were there any? Let's see. Normally we do questions, open questions. Anyone got anything they want to add before we call it? All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and I'll see you next week.